Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Lost Origin, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are going to be looking at the poster child of Silver Tempest. Lugia VSTAR is looking to be an extremely powerful archetype coming into this format, so let's talk about just one of the ways you can play this new deck. Starting off with the basic concept then, introducing you to what this deck's all about. Lugia's VSTAR power is really how the deck comes together. We're going to try and use the Assemble Star on turn 2 to get 2 Archeops, also from this set, into play, which then really just opens up the floodgates for insane energy acceleration, where we can power up the expensive Storm Dive attack pretty easily, and some other things that we have in the list as well. So it's going to keep our attackers flowing, and because we're accelerating special energy, it means most of these have bonus effects. Sometimes we're going to be getting extra damage, sometimes we're going to be getting some defensive cards in here as well. And because Lugia is already a colorless type, we can play offense and defense very, very well. We have Powerful Colorless, and with 4 in your deck at any time, you could be bursting, you know, the base of 220 way up into ranges that can even knock out V Max Pokemon. And thanks to the new V Guard energy, which I'll talk about momentarily, as well as Cheren's Care, we can be a tanky deck as well. So essentially, thanks to the special energy that Lugia has access to, the 280 and the 220 that you can see hit points and damage-wise can both be augmented in whichever way you need to as well. So very flexible. The opponent has to be playing around both situations as well, which is really cool. So going to be some really interesting interactions and board states created from Lugia that can all happen in a turn because Archeops can develop these guys so nicely. So let's look at and just remind ourselves of the key new cards of Silver Tempest that we're going to be looking at in today's list. So Lugia is that main attacker that we've just looked at. The V-Star power is what gets things going. The Archeops that I just mentioned is the one on screen now, where you can search a deck for 2 special energy and attach them to one of your Pokemon. And yes, Assemble Star can get 2 of these, usually Stage 2 Pokemon, directly into play as long as we discard the Archeops. So the mini goal of the deck is going to be using Ball Search cards to bin off Archeops and possibly even supporter cards. So then on turn 2 we can assemble them back into play, and then the Primal Turbo accelerates from the deck as well, so you're even thinning your deck and making sure that you basically just draw into good cards from then on, which is exceptional. The Lugia V-Star also has important attack text where you can discard a stadium and play. This is really nice for, again, just sort of forcing and winning that stadium war and being awkward for the opponent, making sure that they don't get more than 1 turn of value with their stadium cards is definitely going to be helpful to you as well. The Serena supporter is going to be played in a lot of decks going forward because it has a choose one effect, and one of those options is to gust up benched V Pokemon, which is already essentially Boss's Orders, but only for 2 prizes right now, but also has the other option that allows you to discard up to 3 cards from your hand and then draw until you have 5 in hand. It means we can get quite cheeky with our support account and saves us a lot of space by having 4 of these Serenas that can also act as not only draw supporters in this deck, but also discard enablers for our Archeops. So having Quad Research, Quad Serena, as well as Quick and Ultra Balls gives us a ton of ways that we can throw Archeops into the bin, which is fantastic for us. V-Guard Energy is an excellent new special energy we can be using here, where it provides just a colorless, but we take 30 less damage from Pokemon V to the card it's attached to. It's not stackable, but we are playing a couple copies in here, so we can get, hopefully, a couple different Pokemon that are going to be tanking. So now Lugia, that 280 straight away is pushed into 310 when coming up against the Vs at the very least. So now let's look at the deck list in a bit more detail, and this is going to be a purely colorless energy-based list, and I will definitely have the caveat here that this is not the only Lugia list you'll be seeing on the channel. Far from it, actually. Thanks to Primal Turbo from Archeops, there's so many different attackers that can come into the deck list. There's so many different special energy that aren't being featured in this list that will be stars of other lists that are soon to come. So let's just talk about the baseline. We're Going to start off by having that thick Lugia line, the 4-3, as well as 4 Archeops. I honestly think if you're not playing 4 copies, you're kind of trolling, because the deck is entirely based on this effect and getting 2 into that discard pile. So if you even cut down to 3 copies, you know, it's like playing 3 VIP Pass. You want this in every opening hand, because then it enables your 8 Ball Search cards and your 8 supporter cards. So the deck doesn't do anything without Archeops. Play the full 4 copies, no matter what you do. That's why we're also maxing out all of these Ball Search cards. You really just want to get the deck working. And it's not like you only want to see 1 Archeops. You need to find 2 and discard 2. So maximize your copies of this. You will not regret seeing these in later stages in the game. It's really not an issue. You need to get through the first hurdle and make sure your deck's just working in the first instance. A quick note on the regular Lugia V, it actually does have an attack that also offers discard synergy. You discard 1 card from your hand and draw 3. So this is another enabler inbuilt into the deck list as well, which is fantastic to see. Lugia is kind of your best lead in the deck, and that's one thing that's a little bit lacking from this list, is having many other good leads. We are playing a couple other, well, a handful of other one-prize Pokemon, but yeah, Lugia's usually the thing that you like leading out. Definitely when you go first, it's certainly the play. And you'll notice we play no switch cards whatsoever in the deck list. So you sometimes, if you lead anything but Lugia, you might be using Primal Turbo just to retreat your stuff. So that's something to bear in mind. That actually makes Regigigas the worst lead in the deck, because it has a 4 retreat cost. So this is horrific if you do start the guy. But having the option to power up Gigaton Break all in one turn to deal 300 damage as the baseline, but remember, we play not only 3 copies of Choice Belt, but also Powerful Colorless that can go onto the Regigigas. So there's plenty of ways we can go over the top onto VMAX Pokemon with the Gigas. That's why you are seeing 1 Twin Energy sneak into the list. Not only does it help with the retreat cost of any of these Pokemon, but also it means you can help power up this Gigas, and you're not sort of undoing your damage with double turbo energy. So a really nice one-of, I think, here. When you are playing the colorless suite, I still want to have this one prizer that can help out against Mew. It can help out against Cheren, Palkia. So definitely a nice include, I think, right now. Radiant Gardevoir comes into the list to make us even more tanky into V matchups. Having V-Guard and Radiant Gardevoir gives Mew certainly a really hard time, where it's very resource intensive for them to take knockouts onto the Lugia. We're just representing so much hit points. It really is an issue for them. So I think with this combination plus the Gigas, you should have a pretty decent time into Mew, even without having dark attacking threats, which I think is pretty important here. Also, just in general, pretty handy. Again, offsetting things like Giratina VSTAR as well. Obviously, they have their VSTAR power, but seeing as though Giratinas often are playing Temple of Sinnoh, your V-Guard may be inactive, whereas the Radiant Gardevoir is that second line of defense for you, which is excellent. I know we are playing Path of the Peaks in our own deck list, but we have Storm Dive as our main attack regardless, so we can always discard our own paths going into the opponent's turn to reactivate our Gardevoir. So we are in complete control of this Loving Veil ability, and we can make sure it's online whenever possible. I'm playing an Oranguru. I think it's a really nice card just to add to your overall basic count, because you do like starting a one-prizer whenever you're going second with the deck list. This can attack, of course. It's a colorless guy, so we have the twins, we have the Powerful Colorless. 70 damage is enough to deal with like Conphase and whatnot, so don't sleep on this as an attacking option. But Primate Wisdom is just helping us again make sure, because we are a discard heavy base deck, we can protect some certain cards. You can even just put energies that you draw for turn back into your deck to pull them out immediately with Primal Turbo to make sure you're maximizing your value. And there's a great synergy here with Cheren's Care in particular. I think Oranguru is a staple if you are playing the Cherens, because you can pick up a 4-energy Lugia, put an energy at least straight back into the deck to then get pulled out with a Primal Turbo. So it's making sure that we're not lacking for energy remaining in the deck. That's one of the key combos from this Guru. We're playing Dunsparce because Lightning weakness is a little bit awkward for Lugia. There's obviously Regis going around. There's also a reason for Vikavolt to be seeing more play in the new set thanks to a Regigigas. So protecting yourself, and even a Raichu from the latest set has lightning typing and can hit 280 for 1 colorless thanks to weakness. So shutting that off is going to be important. Right now, you can see I'm not playing Manaphy, so he may still be a little bit vulnerable against the Regi deck. So bear that in mind. It's a small defense. I think it's a big deal against Vikavolt and a little bit of help against the Regis right now. Pumpkaboo because we want to have many outs to Path of the Peak. You'll see that we're playing it ourselves, but we are also scared of Path because Path will shut down our Assemble Star, which is the entire emphasis of the deck. So having your Pumpkin and 8 Ball Search outs is going to be very important. Honestly, right now, when I have no other bounces, I could even see a second copy of Pumpkaboo coming into the deck list just so that it's not a prizing issue, really. So just a mini thing to bear in mind there. We play Crobat just for some extra dig, never a bad thing when you play this much Ball Search, always handy. The belt's very helpful for, again, pushing this Storm Dive. It allows us to potentially KO the max Pokemon with the Lugia, but also just means we get to ration our Powerful Colorless that little bit more, maybe split them between a couple Lugias, rather than fire them all off onto one target that then gets knocked out, and we're then capped at the 220 for the remainder of the game, or even less possibly with Double Turbo. So having Choice Belt allows us to make that push to 280 a lot easier, whilst protecting Powerfuls in the deck, which is really important, and again, it has great synergy with the Gigas also. We're playing the Cherens, like I said, great for tanky Lugias and whatnot. It can also offset some random like Sable Sprinkle damage if you want to, which is cool. You can even pick up your Gigas and your Archeops if you really feel like it's necessary in those matchups, if the opponent's trying to set up damage that way. Couple Marnies for hand disruption for the opponent, whilst also being, adding to our overall draw supports account, and can work alongside our own Path of the Peak as well, which is kind of interesting. Path can be very good in mirror match situations. Path can still be very strong against Arceus, very strong against Mew. Importantly, very strong against Duraludon VMAX, because we are playing entirely special energies, and we would otherwise have no other way to damage them. So that's why we are playing these Path of the Peaks. They're still obviously an incredible card. So many matchups are changed by playing the Stadium. Also very helpful against Cheren Palkia. So, and even Palkintel denying Greninja draws even against Giratina. So yeah, the list goes on. Path is just that incredible catch-all Stadium that's just great against pretty much every deck in format. So having some Marnies in here makes that Path that much more powerful. And again, because Lugia has discard Stadium synergy, we can try and win that Stadium war that little bit more. If people are having to put their own Stadiums into play just for their own synergies, or just if they're offering any support for them, we can try and bounce them with Storm Dives, knowing that we can then win a Stadium war later on with Path, which can be pretty handy for you. We've got the Researchers and the Serenas. I've already mentioned these have great discard synergy for Archeops, which is a big deal. Obviously, Research getting us deep into the deck, and Serena's being our gusting. I'm currently playing no Boss's Orders, which is potentially greedy. I could foresee a 3-1 split where you still play a high count of Serena. The reason why I'm simply maxing out 4 copies is that I want discard synergy for Archeops. I do not want to miss that turn 2 Assemble Star. Let's just get the job done. Let's just use Serena. We have 1 prize attacking options when need be. If you're having to hit through a 1 prizer, like I said, Guru can get through Comphase. Archeops can come and attack with Speedwing as well. Gigas can come in and swing. So we have plenty of 1 prize Pokemon if we have to go through them. So there's something to bear in mind there. If we are going to be offset onto a weird prize race, we can be somewhat 1 prizey ourselves. But Serena keeps us on that 2 prize map, which is typically what you want to be doing as Lugia. And then the special energy really is a treat here. We get the Powerfuls, which is augmenting all of our damage. Captures gives us some real consistency buff. I really like this option, and it's one of the reasons why I'm showing this list off before showing off the Aurora list. Aurora is interesting because it gives you extra discard synergy for Archeops, but being able to play capture energies is a really big deal. It allows you to establish the double Lugia that little bit earlier. It allows you to establish, getting even just 1 Lugia into play and keeping your Ball Search to be Archeops fodder and whatnot. So just allowing you to save search for then other things, because we need to find a lot of Pokemon in the opening stages. If you're going second, you want to find 2 Lugia Vs, and then on turn 2 you need access to 2 Archeops and a V-Star. Like between turns 1 and 2 you need to find a lot of Pokemon. So having some extra inbuilt search is a really helpful thing here. So I really like that high capture energy count. We have 2 DTE and 1 Twin. This can help pay for retreat costings, but also allows you to, again, attack with Storm Dive, especially for the DTEs, and attack with your Gigas without having that downside as well, which is a good thing. Those V-Guards obviously very helpful for helping us tank, and the one copy of Gift Energy to help protect ourselves against Marnie and Roxanne. Actually a very cheeky include. We obviously don't have any sort of engine Pokemon in the deck list, so we are thinning the deck naturally. We thin almost all of these energies throughout the game, so even when you are getting Marnie and Roxanne, you're very likely to hit your supporter cards, because you've already thinned a majority of your Pokemon with all your Ball Search. So naturally we're quite robust. But having a Gift Energy in the mid to late game on a Lugia that's going down is a real help to definitely help you get Serena to close out the game. So it's a one-off include that I think is definitely worthwhile. On to some other options, there's a lot going on here, and I do know that there's a lot of Lugia builds that don't play Path, and they have other ways of dealing with Duraludon, potentially. But one of the more popular stadiums is actually Collapse Stadium. I mentioned that we play Dunsparce right now, but we're not playing Manaphy or Collapsed. Either of these includes would definitely improve your Regi matchup, so I could foresee one or both of these coming into the deck list in some capacity. Right now, I'm with that high count of Path, because I think Path is just a crazy strong deck, and I think there'll be people trying to play Duraludon in the future, because obviously it's trying to target the Lugia matchup if you're not playing Paths. So playing some of these could be a way to respect the Regi matchup. If you just want more stadium bounces in general, you could think about Lost Vacuum. Vacuum has the upside of getting rid of certain tool cards if it's health buff, or some other detrimental things here as well. The Vacuum could be interesting in an Aurora-based list, because it could allow you to get rid of Parasols for a Yveltal attack to come in as well. So the Vacuum probably less important in this deck list, but could be one that comes into other builds of Lugia, especially if you are the Aurora-based build up here. Mew's an interesting one, just giving yourself additional decent leads in the deck, and the Ball Search is honestly some of the most important stuff you could be hitting. So I could even see with Capture Energies just 1 or 2 copies of Mew coming into the deck list, because it does seem to be a reasonable card, and just gives you additional leads that aren't Crobat and aren't Regigigas. So I could foresee this being, you know, even a low count just to increase your odds of having a good lead in the 60, knowing that just having that 1 retreat cost is also a great thing to have in the deck list. Some interesting tools you could think about. Jammer could deny Choice Belt onto Radiant Zard, and Radiant Zard could be in Mirrors, could also be in the Lost Box matchup, and is also important for Regis as well. So having that tool Jammer could keep you out of range, and again be a tech card for a lot of different situations. Right now I'm just sticking to pure Choice Belts because I don't want to be whiffing on them, but I definitely see upsides of the Jammer potentially here. And also there's the option of either an Espeon VMAX line or Big Parasol, depending on how many cards you want to commit to this. Big Parasol can protect you not only against Giratina's V-Star power, but also Yveltal in potential mirror matches, and also against Beedrill if people are getting spicy with some mustard combos. So either of these could be includes going forward, depending on where the meta lands and how good or bad you feel your Giratina matchup is as of right now. The Aurora build is something I'll go into way more detail on in a future video, but just bear in mind there is a wacky, wonderful build where you essentially cut your Capture Energies from the list I've just shown and try and make a few other cuts in the deck list to make space for some wonderful, wacky one-prize one-offs, essentially, for the Aurora-based combo. There's even an argument for adding in Hiding Darkness Energy and Crobat VMAX, possibly going up to a 2-1 line of Crobat, similar to how we've seen it in previous Arceus builds. Crobat VMAX only has 300 hit points, but now you can V-Guard yourself up to make yourself that little bit safer against Mew VMAX, which actually makes it a real threat in the game once again, which is kind of appealing. There is potentially more colorless stuff. I've definitely toyed around with slacking before, because that 260 breakpoint, just having a much higher base damage allows you to again protect some powerful colorless and still be threatening that 280 very easily, and even belting your way up to VMAX KOs can be a really big deal here. Blissey could be nice for recovering powerfuls and almost lets you be reckless with them intentionally, so you can just maximize your powerful colorless energy tempo, knowing that you can, at some point later in the game, Bliss will blast your energies straight back onto a Blissey, which is kind of powerful, especially because you're not just starting off with that 40 damage, attachment. You can immediately get 4 energy onto an from Archeops onto a Blissey, and then recover 4 energy from a Lugia that's been KO'd. And as long as the Blissey isn't dealt with, you're basically saying, I have checkmate. So that's kind of a powerful option as well. Stoutland, if you're really worried about some cheeky 1-prize stuff, you can get yourself onto that sort of 2-prize map by improving this little 40 damage by having Powerful Colorless on your side as well. But I already think that's such an important resource. Don't really want to go down the sort of gimmick, especially without switching cards in the deck list. Then Lumineon could go alongside Crobat or instead of. Right now I'm just at high counts of everything, but if you want to get a little bit cheekier, like I said, a 3-1 split with Boss and Serena could be reasonable, and more reasonable with a Lumineon certainly, and I'd also consider Roxanne at that stage as well. The reason why I'm not playing Lumineon and only one Crobat is well, the build that I've just shown wants to be tanky. It's playing Guardy and it's playing V-Guard energies, so I don't want to have these very easy workarounds for the opponent sitting on the board the entire game. I feel like if you are playing Collapse Stadium, you have a bit more license to play extra Crobats and extra Fish, because you can discard them from play from your own stadium, but this build doesn't have such luxuries. Onto the overall matchup spread then. These are some of the decks I'm expecting to be the top decks in the game. And as of right now, the list that I've just shown, I think will probably struggle with the one prize lost box, because Radiant Charizard has such easy ways to get around our damage reductions. V-Guard and Radiant Guardy both work for V Pokemon only, so Radiant Zard can still hit 280 quite easily with Belt, or with Sableye Sprinkle stuff. Yes, I know we have Cheren's Care, but them forcing that on us the entire game is a lot of pressure, and I feel like them reloading Charizard is something that's just going to be awkward for us. We only play 2 Marnies, and even though we play Paths, as we always know, they play a very high vacuum count, so I feel like we're a little bit disadvantageous in that instance, especially again because we could just happen to lead like a Guru or a Pumpkaboo in the worst case scenario, and they can even Echoing Horn, stuff like that, back to get easy Sprinkle prizes from Sableye, and they set the tempo quite well. I would also say the list that we play right now is quite bad into Gigas. You could respect Gigas more by playing Collapsed and playing Manaphy, or at least playing one of those two, and it would definitely bring the matchup closer. We do have one prize attacking threats, but you have to use them sparingly, right? Because you don't want to just attack with an Archeops then get immediately knocked out, because you've already spent a Primal Turbo getting 3 energies on an Archeops, but then one gets knocked out and you no longer have that acceleration for the remainder of the game. So definitely something you have to be cautious of. And I would also say Vikavolt is probably a more difficult matchup. Yes, I am playing the Dunsparce, but the deck is so item reliant just to even get your discard synergies working with Archeops that, like I said, your ball search is so dedicated to getting Lugias and Archeops and Lugia VSTAR. You don't really, you need to have a really good hand to be able to prioritize Dunsparce. So you kind of need to naturally draw Dunsparce without your ball search, and that's not going to be an easy thing. And even if that happens, the opponent can always target Dunsparce, obviously, quite early on, especially with the damage mods they have of Alecki now. They can gust up the Dunce early. Even if they are sacrificing a lot of tempo, they have easy ways to rebuild Vikavolts now, and even using Raikous aggressively could be a huge problem. So those are the sort of problem matchups I'm outlining right now. Don't be scared by the Arceus Drago. Maybe it has raised some eyebrows here. This is me basically wanting to put Arc Tina and Arc Gudra on the same slide, but also I need to talk about Drago this week as well because it's a new deck. So if you don't believe in Drago, don't fear, this is also going to be the placeholder spot for Arceus plus other. So if you're thinking Arc Flying Peak, if you're thinking any of the dragons that we've seen with Arceus as of late, that's kind of the placeholder spot because there's only so much space I have on this slide. I think everything else we should be pretty reasonable against. Like I said, you have great defensive tools against Giratina. It's a real resource slog for them. Palkia, again, finds it difficult with V-Guard energy, certainly. It's quite easy for us to stay out of range, even though we go wide with double Archeops and another benched V Pokemon most of the time. I think we should have a pretty good time there. We hit 280 so easily with Lugia. I think you race other V-Stars pretty well, especially with the defensive stuff. Even Zoroark, I think, finds it a little bit awkward. I think it finds it very, very rough if we are playing Collapsed as well. That's when things get even worse for the Zoro, probably. Mew, I think, is reasonable, again, with the amount of hit point reductions that we weave in. It's a difficult race for Mew most of the time. Bliss Tank, we're not worried about. We have Gigas, we have Archeops that can attack through Miltanks, and we have big burst potential into Blissies. Their hit points aren't really a problem for us. And against Cheren Palkia, yes, they have one hit KO potential, and we do struggle to hit that 330 mark very easily in our list, but we are playing Paths and Marnie, and we're going to just sort of keep them honest as well. We can represent, definitely going first. I think it'll be an awkward matchup for the Cheren. So yeah, I think against just the 3 that I've outlined, we're not that strong. But do bear in mind, I feel like Vikavolt probably the one that's the most naturally difficult. Whereas we can tech in things like Tool Jammer, for example, into this 60. To improve this matchup, or just increasing our Marnie count in general is helpful for this matchup. And we obviously have techs for Gigas by playing Manaphy or Collapsed in here as well. So I think in general, we're well-rounded into the current best decks in the game, which means that Lugia is going to be a real threat in the format, no doubt. That does lead me on to those closing thoughts. Honestly, Archeops is just a silly card. The fact that we can get this card into play, not have to jump through hoops by putting a fossil onto the board and then rare candying into this card, which some people may have even done if we hadn't seen the Lugia text, because this acceleration is the silliest thing I've ever seen. The fact that Lugia can cheat 2 of these into play is just absurd, and it means that Lugia is going to be so versatile going forward. I've already mentioned and touched upon the Aurora-based build, which I'll be profiling later on, either this week or next. But there's going to be a ton of other Lugia builds out there as well. There's single strike options. There's a ton of like V Max options that could go alongside Lugia as well. And there's even more colorless options that we didn't touch on today. So yeah, Lugia is going to be super versatile, which means it can change with the times, which I think is really important and is probably going to keep this deck afloat for a decent amount of time. And yeah, I honestly think, already, just going into LAIC, Lugia might be public enemy number 1. It gives me vibes similar to when Guardi GX was coming out from Burning Shadows just before Worlds. Everyone saw the card, saw the stats, saw how it fared in the metagame, and immediately we knew that even though it's a brand new contender, this deck needs to be countered. And I think that's essentially the spot that we're in with Lugia coming into the set. There's a huge wave of hype based on the Japanese results that we've seen in early essentially League Cup tournaments, large League Cups more or less, and Lugia has been outstanding, but bear in mind we haven't quite had their knee-jerk response with counters just yet, and that's something that the Western world loves to do. They can't just allow the best deck to be the best deck for a long time. We almost always try and enter the ring with some counters. So just a few things to spark some imagination for you guys. Obviously, Marnie Path is a big one, because this is a combo deck. If you miss the Assemble Star, you pass, which is really bad. So I think Marnie Path could be coming back in a big way. I think Duraludon is an issue for certainly collapsed stadium builds of Lugia, and even ones that are playing Aurora Energy and Yveltal. If you're playing Parasols in Duraludon, which you probably should anyway because of Giratina, that's going to be a huge problem for Lugia going forward, so I could expect Duraludon being a card. I could even foresee Lugia playing Duraludon because you can use the single strike energies to buff Duraludon's damage output, and then you're basically a mirror teched build, which is kind of interesting. I do think Vikavolt is a natural strong archetype going into this deck, so be wary of that. There's potential for Mustard, there's potential for the new Raichu card that can hit 280 for a colorless energy, and one of the scariest things for me is Galarian Weezing actually shutting off the option not only to Assemble Star, but also to Primal Turbo as well, which means potentially even like a mid-game Weezing could be a huge issue for the deck. So yeah, Weezing plus something. Answers on a postcard down below how you're looking to counter Lugia. Are you more excited about a colorless sort of simplistic build like this one, or are you going to be going down the rabbit hole with Auroras? I'll hear it all down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.